All right. Welcome, everyone. Let's do the Zoom greet your neighbor, everyone. Hi. It's great to see you all. We do have we've got a couple of guests, I think, and I don't know who all is joining. I do know we have visiting Rotarian Donna Connolly with us. Donna, welcome. It's nice to see you here. And we have at least one of our youth exchange students. I'm not sure. I know Lou's here. I don't know if Huli is or Sataro. But what a fantastic program they all did last week for us. That was a fun one. If you weren't able to be here, I did share the link to the recording that you can watch, or if you just want to watch it again sometime, because they did a fantastic job. Last week also, we had a couple of our cooks join us. Sarah and Chris were here. I'm not sure if there were others. I've invited them again for this week, and we'll continue to share the link with them. Hopefully, if you are here with us, that you are enjoying your visits as well. I do want to take a moment and extend our Wooster Rotary sympathies to the family of Bob Bogner, who passed away last week. Bob was the son of Wooster Rotarian Pete Bogner, the cousin and business partner of Wooster Rotarian Ted Bogner. And Bob joined us on various occasions for the annual Veterans Day program. So he was an honorary Wooster Rotarian for a number of days each year. As far as announcements go, I have a few of those. Watch for an email coming out sometime in the near future about voting for our zone representative to the nominating committee for Rotary International President. The committee is being selected for looking forward to 2022-23, and there are a couple of people from our zone who have expressed interest. So Rotary International regulations call for a vote. So watch for that email. Also, another Rotary International topic or announcement, and that is, you may have gotten messages about this. The Rotary International Convention will be going virtual since they had to cancel the in-person convention, which was to be in Hawaii. They will be doing it virtual, and it will be free for Rotarians to attend. June 20 through 26th is when that will be online. So if you didn't receive information and you are interested in that, you can find it on the Rotary International webpage, or contact me and I'm happy to forward that information to you. One final announcement. We now have 13 people signed up who confirmed to help with flag troubleshooting later this week. So anyone who can, even if you're available for just one day between Wednesday and Friday, contact Brent Rice and let him know if you are able to help. The troubleshooting tends to be mostly getting a message from Brent or Susan around a call that they've received because someone's flag didn't get put out, or someone's flag may be damaged and just needs replaced. So it is not a real strenuous job, but the more people we have helping, the better it is. All right. At this time, I am going to introduce our guest speaker for today. Rotarian D. Vaidya was born in Bombay and raised 100 miles away in Pune, India. He received a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay, and a master's degree in polymer science from the University of Akron, Ohio. He later attended Purdue University and received a master's degree in industrial administration in 1976. D went back to India and worked at his father's rubber products company for 3 years. But he missed the United States and its free market system and returned to Akron at the beginning of 1979. In 1980, he met his wife, the former Mary Neihart, who was then working at the University of Akron. D and Mary have been married for over 38 years and have 3 children. After stints in Texas and Canada, Dee and Mary moved to Wooster, Mary's hometown, and launched Technographics, Inc. in 1994, producing digital maps for the US government. In January 2003, after a decade of Department of Defense work, Technographics won a $200 million global geospatial intelligence prime contract from the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, pursuant to the 9/11 terrorist attacks. That contract spanned 10 years and allowed Technographics to grow to more than $50 million per year in revenues. Dee spun out the Engineering Services and Product Lifecycle Management division and kept it as a separate company called Nobletech. Dee is now chairman of the engineering services firm that focuses on NC programming for the US aerospace industry. In May 2012, Dee acquired RDM Equipment, also in Worcester, and serves as its president. The company distributes small equipment and spare parts to pipeline companies and firms drilling for oil and gas. Dee has also served as the chairman of the Worcester Area Chamber of Commerce and is recognized for his efforts to help the Wayne County economic community prosper. Fellow Rotarians, please welcome Dee Vaidya to the Zoom podium. Dee. I have unmuted you. You are ready to go.
Thank you. Folks, about 15 years ago, I came across an article in the Wall Street Journal with the headline, "Inside Pentagon, a Scholar Shapes Views of China." The subheading was more important. It said, "An optimist turns gloomy." I was so intrigued by the article that I saved it. Coincidentally, I came across the 2005 article a few weeks ago and Googled the scholar it talked about. His name is Michael Pillsbury, and he's an independently wealthy member of the family that owned the Pillsbury Flour Company. He's an influential Pentagon advisor and former China lover who now believes most Americans have China all wrong. He says many of us think of the place as an inherently gentle country intent on economic prosperity. In that camp, he lumps the lower ranks of the State Department, the CIA, most US investors, and the majority of America's China scholars, whom he calls panda huggers. Pillsbury says his mission is to assure that the Defense Department doesn't fall into that trap. Beijing sees the United States as an inevitable foe and is planning accordingly, warned the 75-year-old China expert 15 years ago. We'd be remiss not to take that into account. Fast forward to 2015. In his book, The 100-Year Marathon, he points out that many who study China have been taught to view the country as a helpless victim of Western imperialism, a notion that China's leaders believe and actively encourage. When he was studying for his PhD at Columbia University in 1967, his professors emphasized how the West and Japan had mistreated China, with the implication that his generation somehow needed to atone for it. Many of his college textbooks contain similar arguments. This perspective, the desire to help China at all costs and to overlook China's anti-West actions, has colored US government's approach to dealing with China for many years. It has affected the advice China experts offered to US presidents and other leaders for decades. It has influenced our translations of Chinese books and papers. Please understand that the Mandarin language's very complexity is like a secret code. It has very few syllables, and so each syllable has multiple meanings. A foreigner has to make important decisions about how to translate these multiple Chinese concepts, which can inherently lead to misunderstandings. This fact makes it easier for the supposed China experts to interpret Chinese messages subjectively in ways that conform to their own beliefs. What we must do is look not just at speeches, but also at the context of those speeches. And we need to look for larger hidden messages. For well over half a century, Americans failed to do this. Unknown to most of us until recently, the vague expressions of the Chinese military hawks were obscure references to ancient history. So without that context, the military hawks' input into Chinese strategy was hidden from most foreigners. We believe that Americans that American aid to a fragile China would help China become a democratic power without ambitions of regional or global dominance. We underestimated the influence of China's military hawks. Every one of the assumptions behind that belief was wrong, dangerously so. The error of those assumptions is becoming clear by the day by what China does, and equally important by what China does not do. False assumption number one, engagement brings complete cooperation. For 4 decades now, we believe that engagement with the Chinese would induce China to cooperate with the West on a wide range of policy problems. It hasn't. False assumption number two, China is on the road to democracy. China certainly has changed in the past 30 years, but as author James Mann, who has reported in China for more than 30 years, points out, those predictions that China will somehow evolve smoothly into a liberal democracy could be a fantasy. False assumption number three, China, the fragile flower. Many Americans express the worrisome view that if the United States pressed China too hard to have elections, to free dissidents, to extend the rule of law, and to treat ethnic minorities fairly, this pressure would lead to the collapse of the Chinese state, causing chaos throughout Asia. While we worried about China's woes, its economy more than doubled. False assumption number four, China wants to be and is just like us. Chinese literature and strategy from Sun Tzu through Mao Zedong has emphasized deception more than any other military doctrine. False assumption number five, China's hawks are weak. Over the years, Chinese hawks proposed to the Chinese leadership to mislead and manipulate American policymakers to obtain intelligence and military, technological, and economic assistance. These military hawks have been advising Chinese leaders, beginning with Mao Zedong, to avenge a century of humiliation and aspire to replace the United States as the economic, military, and political power of the world by the year 2049, the 100th anniversary of the Communist Revolution. This plan became known as the 100-year marathon. It is a plan that has been implemented by the Communist Party leadership from the beginning of its relationship with the United States. Its goal is simple, to avenge or wipe clean past foreign humiliations. The humiliation began with Great Britain's defeat of China in the First Opium War in 1842 and ended with the Allied and Chinese defeat of Imperial Japan 103 years later in 1945. After that century's humiliations are avenged, China will set up a world order that will be fair to China in a world without American global supremacy. The hawks assess that China can succeed in this project only through deception. Senator Mitt Romney recently said, the coronavirus outbreak has awakened the United States to China's grand strategy for economic, military, and geopolitical domination. China has done what we have allowed it to do. To save a few dollars, we have looked the other way. COVID-19 has exposed China's dishonesty for all to see. And it's a clarion call for America to seize the moment. When the health crisis has passed, the US should bring together like-minded countries to develop a strategy aimed at dissuading China from pursuing its predatory path. During his presidential campaign, Romney identified Russia as the nation's top geopolitical foe, but more recently said, though Russia is an ongoing threat, it's a nation in decline, while China is on the rise. China poses a threat to freedom, human rights, and free enterprise, and it'll be the principal challenge facing us in the 21st century. In March, Romney called on the National Security Council to counter the Chinese government's sinister propaganda about the origins of the coronavirus. America is awakening to China, he wrote. The COVID-19 pandemic has revealed that to a great degree, Americans' health is in Chinese hands. From medicines to masks, our country is at Beijing's mercy. Embarrassed by the revelation of this vulnerability, politicians in Washington will certainly act to remedy our dependence. But China's stranglehold on pharmaceuticals is only a small sliver of its grand strategy for domination. Right now, Beijing's weapon of choice is economic. To achieve superiority, China not only steals technology from other nations, it massively subsidizes industries it determines to have strategic importance. It also employs practices that have long been forbidden by developed nations, including bribery, monopoly, currency manipulation, and predatory pricing. As China ascended in the global marketplace, the West allowed its abnormal industrial policies, hoping it would move toward freedom and adherence to the international rules of commerce. That indulgence has exacted a heavy toll on us. For example, China captured the global steel market through means that are illegal or impossible elsewhere, including pricing far below cost, artificially depressing currency, massive government subsidies, and bribery. It now controls more than half of the world's steel output, resulting in steel plants shuttered around the world and the loss of hundreds of thousands of jobs. We need to keep in mind that a predator, unbound by the rules followed by its competitors, is allowed, if a predator unbound by the rules followed by its competitors is allowed to operate in a free market, that market is no longer truly free. Romney said the United States was right to blow the whistle on Chinese President Xi Jinping and impose tariffs. But we must go a great deal further. We must align our negotiating strategy and policies with other nations that adhere to the global rules of trade. This means narrowing trade disputes with our friends and uniting against China's untethered abuse. The Financial Times of London recently reported that Australia is continuing its campaign for an inquiry into the origins of the coronavirus outbreak, despite a furious reaction from Beijing. Beijing has accused Canberra of teaming up with Washington to mount a political campaign against China. Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison said on April 29 that his government wanted an independent inquiry into the COVID-19 outbreak, which he said was in the interest of the wider international community. The diplomatic skirmish between Beijing and Canberra comes as tensions grow between China and Western nations, which are concerned Beijing is mounting a disinformation campaign to sow divisions and make strategic gains globally. Analysts said China's aggressive reaction is because of Beijing's sensitivity over its role as a source of the outbreak and its willingness to bully its trading partners into overlooking it. In the third week of April, China complained to the European Union 3 times and warned that bilateral relations would deteriorate if a report citing Beijing's tactics to avoid blame was published. In the last week of April, Beijing warned that Chinese consumers might boycott Australian products. Australia's Prime Minister was undeterred. This is a virus that has taken more than 300,000 lives across the world. It has shut down the global economy, he said. Following Mr. Morrison's call for an inquiry, the Global Times, the Chinese government newspaper, accused Canberra of leading a panda bashing campaign and becoming a chess piece of Washington. China's ambassador to Australia even accused Canberra of obviously teaming up with the forces in Washington to launch a political campaign against China. He said Chinese people were frustrated, dismayed, and disappointed at Australia. Tourists and students may have second thoughts about traveling to the island nation, he said, where 1 in 10 university students is Chinese. He warned Chinese consumers might wonder why they should drink Australian wine or eat Australian beef. His comments earned a rebuke from Canberra, which accused Beijing of economic coercion. General H.R. McMaster, the former White House National Security Advisor and author of an upcoming book called Battlegrounds, The Fight to Defend the Free World, says the Chinese Communist Party has no intention of playing by the rules of international law, trade, or commerce. China's overall strategy relies on coercion at home and abroad, as well as on concealing the nature of China's true intentions. What makes this strategy dangerous is the integrated nature of the party's efforts across government, industry, academia, and the military. The Chinese Communist Party's goals run counter to American ideals and interests. China intends to establish its dominance through a massive effort organized under 3 policies. One of them, the Belt and Road Initiative, calls for more than $1 trillion in new infrastructure investments across the Indo-Pacific region, Eurasia, and beyond. Its purpose is to place China at the hub of trade routes and communications networks. For developing countries with fragile economies, Belt and Road sets a ruthless trap. China is the sole lender in the world that hopes not to get the loans paid back. When countries are unable to service their loans, China converts its debt into equity and gains control of their ports, airports, dams, power plants, and communications networks. As of 2018, distress from debt was growing in 23 countries with Belt and Road financing. 8 poor countries have already declared their levels of debt as unsustainable. China must understand it will not have free, unfettered access to other economies unless it stops using predatory practices. China faces a simple choice: play by the global rules or face steep economic penalties. I feel we can send China that message as a nation and individually as well. We need to wield our own pocketbooks in ways that stop enriching China. Buy goods made elsewhere and let Chinese products languish on store shelves. Look for the Made in China label and walk away from it. Without effective pushback from the United States and like-minded nations, China will become even more aggressive in promoting its statist economy and authoritarian capitalism. General McMaster's 2017 state visit to Beijing and exposure to China's powerful combination of insecurity and ambition reinforced his belief that the United States and other nations must no longer adhere to the old view of China. In the present pandemic, China disclosed the outbreak of a mysterious pneumonia-like illness to international health officials on December 31st. Yet, it allowed some 800,000 passengers to fly nonstop all over the world from Wuhan the same day, while it halted all domestic flights from there. Since then, at least 430,000 people have arrived in the United States alone on direct flights from China, according to the New York Times. On January 23, China locked down Wuhan totally to control spread of the virus. But in the 23 days before the shutdown, an estimated 5 million people had fled the city. Given all this, and keeping deception as a strategy in mind, let's watch a 7-minute video that digs into how this novel coronavirus outbreak emanated in Wuhan. Kim?
Okay.
The thing is, after living in China for 10 years and speaking fluent Chinese, you get to know a society pretty well. And let me tell you this, if you're applauding or admiring the political leadership of China, you're all deluded beyond belief. China doesn't operate like your country. The Chinese government is a face and greed-driven government that relies on lies and bullying to maintain leadership.
It was working well, Kim.
It's broken and fragile, so it doesn't surprise me that when I was doing my research in my last video, it wasn't hard to follow a paper trail left by the CCP themselves. In my last video, I found it very suspicious that the official Wuhan Virology Lab had a job opening from November 18th of 2019, asking for scientists to come research the relationship between the coronavirus and bats, specifically why they carry the virus, yet are long-lived. It's no secret that longevity, as well as other ailments, are well studied in China, as can be seen by the ridiculous amounts of traditional Chinese medicines that supposedly treat them. Bear bile injections as state-endorsed coronavirus cure, anyone? Anyway, while reading this job posting, I failed to notice until the next day that another job posting followed the previous post, and this is where it got big. So when I examined the job posting, I noticed that there was actually a follow-up job posting on December 24th of 2019. And remember, this is before any news broke, which basically says, we've discovered a new and terrible virus and would like to recruit people to come deal with it. I found this interesting because, like I said, the news didn't come out about coronavirus until ages after that. So I decided to dig a little bit more into the staff. After all, they would have published articles being scientists. Turns out, this woman, Shijiang Li, she was the lead researcher of the lab, and she was famous for bat studies. They called her Batwoman in some circles. She even received an award for proving bats are natural reservoirs of SARS-like coronaviruses. In November 2017 all the way through 2018, she had already written 3 articles about how bats can transmit coronaviruses to humans. This is all public knowledge. She and her team went south to Yunnan province, all the way, deep south of China. It's very beautiful there. And she found out that SARS-like viruses originally came from bats, in fact. In 2017, from data taken from one of her studies in rural Yunnan province, she took blood samples from 218 villagers. After testing it, it showed that SARS-like viruses found in bats from nearby caves have a high potential to affect people. She predicted that humans coming into contact with bats would have a high chance of becoming infected. After blood testing the 218 villagers, she found that 6 people in Yunnan were found to be infected. She returned to Wuhan to the lab to continue studying SARS-like coronaviruses from bats for a long period of time. And this is why you can see the November 18th, 2019 job posting asking for more researchers to join the project. During this time, we don't know much, but the December 24th posting acknowledges that they've made a big discovery in human transmissibility and they need more help to deal with it. So that's where it got kind of spooky. During my research, a name kept popping up. Huang Yanling. Huang Yanling was a researcher in the lab working on the virology of bats with Shi Zhengli, and she's missing. Most people believe her to be patient 0, and most people believe she's dead. Shi Zhengli, the head lab leader, told the government that she swears on her life that she isn't dead, nor was she infected. However, all of her info on the Wuhan lab website, where I found the job posting, it's gone. So if you look here, if you go to the actual virology website, you can see all the people that were working here or were students. They all have their bios still up, whether or not they moved on from the Wuhan lab. But if you can see, Huang Yanling's profile is completely vanished. Her picture is gone and now her bio is gone as well. But if you go to the other students, all their bios remain intact. No one has seen her, and the government has posted a notice instead of any information about her on the lab website, stating that there were rumors of her disappearance, but she's alive and well, without giving an ounce of proof, of course. Everyone on the Chinese internet is searching for her, but most believe that her body was quickly cremated and the people working at the crematorium were perhaps infected, as they were not given any information about the virus. It was a secret after all. The thing is, this has sparked a massive discussion on the Chinese internet, and most of the articles get scrubbed pretty quickly, but I found a lot of good points. Now the thing is, the CCP put up this kind of notice saying that she's totally alive and everything's okay and don't believe these rumors. But if you've been in China, you know how much the CCP actually hates rumors. And if Huang Yanling is truly alive, like they claim, why is her photo and bio removed? The other associates and graduates remain on the website even after moving to other positions at different labs or different universities. The first thing that the government would do, the CCP that I know at least, the first thing they would do to quash this rumor is to make her have a public appearance. Then people would stop talking about it. Yet people are still looking for her and can't find her. And I'm not talking about normal netizens, I'm talking about PhDs, I'm talking about scientists, I'm talking about professors. And this is where it kind of started to come together. On February 6, 2020, Xiao Boatao, he was a professor, he posted a thesis about details that he knew about, but he wasn't supposed to talk about. I see some kind of links to people like Li Wenliang who wanted to say something, but they couldn't. But Xiao Boatao, the professor, he posted the information anyway. He knew researchers at the lab that were infected, and they had already begun self-quarantine after they showed symptoms of being infected. And the majority of the researchers at the lab were already suspicious that this virus that they were coming down with was from bats. The professor directly pointed out that the main source of the virus is from the Wuhan lab, which is only 300 or actually 280 meters to be exact from the Huanan seafood market, where it was originally claimed to have originated. He also claims that it is not a natural infection, so not something that people would have just come across in nature. He also gives a clear timeline and has information that researchers were splashed with urine and blood samples from all the bats that were collected. Not only that, he also knew exactly how many bats were collected in the lab. Now, pairing the researcher Huang Yanling's disappearance with the fact that people working in the lab claim to have been splashed with coronavirus-containing vials, and her online presence has been scrubbed from existence, all happening in a lab 280 meters away from the Huanan seafood market, where the lab in question had been studying bat-to-human transmissibility of coronaviruses. It's quite clear that the Chinese government needs to close its mouth and acknowledge that this in fact did come from Wuhan, Hubei, China. I did not get into any conspiracy theories. I'm not talking about bioweapons or biolabs or anything of the sort. This was all public information on the Chinese internet, published by researchers, scientists, and doctors.
Okay. Dee, do you
Yes, ma'am.
have additional comments? Or ready to take questions?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to see if I can answer any questions.
If you have questions, you're welcome to shout it out if you want, type it into the chat box. If you are listening and don't have access to the computer screen, you can send an email to Lynn, if that's possible. Any questions? Phil?
Dee, I know this is a little bit off your subject, but would you like to comment at all on the situation with Taiwan?
I'm not quite sure in what context you mean that, but starting with the fact that Taiwan has controlled this pandemic very well, because they were prepared from the last pandemic that they faced, which I think was SARS or H1N1, I'm not quite sure. But the Chinese view of Taiwan is, as you know, it's part of China, it's their territory. It just happens to be a faction that's running a democratic and capitalistic economy, but they fully believe that it is part of them and they are going to get it back, just like with Hong Kong, where they have, over so many years agreed to take it back, and they're trying to accelerate that process. But with Taiwan, the opinion of most people is, who study the subject of China and Taiwan, is that China will make its move at some point in time, even if that means military confrontation with the United States, and make Taiwan a formal province of China.
Thank you.
Kim, I do have a question from chat from Doug Druschel. Seems to me that a bipartisan consensus could be reached that there are certain necessities which we should insist be manufactured in the US, even if we could get a cheaper price in China. Pharmaceuticals, technology components, medical devices, and other things come to mind. Are you aware of any movement in this direction?
I am not, but I would love to see some movement in that direction to ensure that we don't have this kind of dependence on China. And I've made it my mission to speak out on this subject after reading that book.
Another question from chat, Dee. This is from Andy Jones. Dee, what role had the American media play in either controlling of spreading PRC propaganda?
I can't really speak too well about that. I don't think, it's just the media's fault. It all started about 4 decades ago, a little more than that, when I think Deng Xiaoping saw that he and his team visited Singapore and saw the dynamic growth Singapore had brought about by embracing capitalism. And so Deng basically went back to China with his team, and they brainstormed how they could develop like Singapore. And one of the parties that raised its hand was the World Bank. Under, I think, that time its president was somebody by the name of Clausen or so. And over the first few decades, the World Bank sent its experts and did analyses of Chinese problems and gave them not only vast amounts of money in terms of loans and what have you, but gave them direction on how to improve their economy, make it more efficient, and which is why over the last 35 years, you see sort of you might say an authoritarian style of capitalism that has been allowed to mushroom in China, and there's always state control of even those private companies. But I would say that it's organizations like the World Bank that have been far more instrumental in where China is today than our media.
Good. Dee, if you could give us the name of the book again so that everyone knows, or maybe even how to get that, where you would suggest getting it.
It's called the 100-Year Marathon, and it's written by Michael Pillsbury, like Pillsbury Dough. The 100-Year Marathon by Michael Pillsbury.
Dee, I have a question. What has been your business experience with China, either stealing or attempting to steal technology?
You know, I've been fortunate that I have had no experience with China in that regard. From the time I was growing up in India, and particularly because I think it was in the 1960s that China attacked India, the northeast frontier. India has always looked, and Indians have always looked upon China as an enemy nation. And so I've had no desire to go there. Not even to go sightseeing and look at the Great Wall. And I've had no business dealings with China. And as far as I know, we have not been tampered with because we try to maintain the highest standards of security in our systems at work because of the kind of work we do. So I have fortunately not had any experience with China whatsoever.
Good. And while we're waiting on other questions, for those of you that cannot see the chat, Brent Rice reports that Julieta landed safely in Charlotte just recently. Her next flight is to Miami later this afternoon, and then she has a morning flight tomorrow from Miami to Buenos Aires, where she will meet her parents. So please keep her and her family in your thoughts and prayers as she travels. I don't have any other questions right now in the chat, Kim.
Okay.
Thank you
Anyone?
very much.
No other questions? Dee, thank you. I see some folks starting to clap already. Thank you so much. This has been another good one. Some closing reminders. First of all, I don't know if she's still with us, but I did see Mary Vaidya as a guest today. So if she's not with us, Dee, please tell her that we were happy to see her join us today. Yeah. A couple other reminders. Please contact Brent Rice if you are available to help Wednesday, Thursday, and/or Friday this week for our big Memorial Day flag setup. We will be back here again in 2 weeks, June 1st. We will not have a meeting next Monday, which is Memorial Day, and I do hope that you all have a safe Memorial Day weekend. With that, in this third week, may we all keep the third question of the Rotary four-way test in mind. Will it build goodwill and better friendships? We stand adjourned. Thank you all.